Good evening, friends. Welcome to the Weird History series. Tonight, I need your help. I'd like you to imagine yourself sitting in a Victorian era carriage, its wheels clattering over the wet cobblestone streets of London. You lift a corner of the curtain. It is the summer of 1885. The air is thick with a complicated mix of smells. The pungent reek of horse manure, the acrid bite of coal smoke, and the faint damp scent drifting in from the River Thames. All blended together. This is the very breath of that era. The gaslights along the street have just been lit, their dim yellow glow melting into the heavy fog like half-melted amber, stretching the shadows of passers-by into long, thin silhouettes. This is the heart of the world, the capital of the British Empire, a place half heaven and half hell. And tonight you are on your way to meet a man who intends to punch a hole straight into that hell. His plan is brutally simple. He will buy a 13-year-old girl in London and then show her to the world and say, "This is London." You push open the heavy wooden door of the Pall Mall Gazette office. A thick smell of ink, paper and cigar smoke pours out to greet you. This is Fleet Street, the source of London's news. In the basement, the printing presses rumble with a deep, steady thunder, like a tireless steel behemoth shaking the floor. This is your territory, because you are William Thomas Stead, the editor-in-chief of this newspaper. You are not like the others. The old newspapers of Fleet Street are written by gentlemen for gentlemen, polite in tone, neutral in viewpoint, like a quiet conversation in a private club. But your newspaper, as you often say, is a weapon used to attack the devil. You pioneered a new style of journalism, later known as New Journalism. Your paper features enormous, startling headlines, clear maps and charts, even direct interviews with ordinary people. You believe newspapers should not merely record facts. They should sound the clarion call to war, the hammer that drives government reform. You call this a kingdom of news, and you truly live by it. 2 years ago, with your report, The Tragedy of London's Abandoned, you exposed the horrors of the slums so brutally that the government was forced to establish a royal commission, clear the worst districts, and begin building new rental housing. Last year, through another series of articles, you persuaded the government to allocate an additional $5 million to the Navy. You are not a warmonger. You simply believe that a strong navy is necessary to preserve world peace. You are like a crusading knight wielding a newspaper instead of a sword, always searching for the next demon to expose. As the son of a priest, you carry an unwavering devotion to morality and faith. You pray every day, convinced that everything you do is fulfilling God's will, standing on the side of the angels. Yet to achieve what you consider righteous, you never hesitate to use controversial, even extreme, methods. Your biographer later wrote that you distorted facts, fabricated stories, lied and betrayed trust, but always out of a sincere desire to reform the world. A man willing to do wrong in order to do right, a contradiction as stark as London itself. Half magnificent imperial grandeur, half filthy, suffocating slums. And in the summer of 1885, you stand at the pinnacle of your career, on the edge of its most dangerous precipice. You have discovered a new demon, a minotaur lurking in the darkest corners of London, a monster that feeds on young girls. You intend to slay it with your pen. You pick up a freshly printed newspaper from your desk. Thanks to the Industrial Revolution, newspapers are no longer luxuries. Cheap wood pulp paper and steam-powered presses send them flooding into every corner of the city at unprecedented speed. A single newspaper, costing only a penny, allows a factory worker or a housewife to see the very same headlines you do. This gives you something no journalist before you ever possessed, the power to shape public opinion. Your name appears boldly on the page, and you know a storm is coming. You're not merely reporting news, you are creating it. You turn from the window to a document on your desk, a draft parliamentary bill, the Criminal Law Amendment Bill of 1885. It has been passed from committee to committee, gathering dust. Its core proposal is simple. Raise the age of consent for girls from 13 to 16 and give police greater authority to shut down brothels exploiting minors. In 1885, Britain, a 13-year-old girl could legally consent to sexual relations. As long as she said yes, no matter the fear, coercion, or deception, no crime was committed. 13. Only 1 year older than the legal marriage age for girls. To you and many reformers, this is a national disgrace. Behind the bill stands the social purity movement, led by passionate activists, most famously Josephine Butler and Ellis Hopkins, early feminists mixed with evangelical Christianity. They challenge Victorian hypocrisy. Society quietly accepts male promiscuity, yet demands absolute chastity from women. They call for a single moral standard for both genders. Their supporters wear white ribbons as public declarations of sexual integrity, radical symbols for the time. Yet despite such a massive social movement, the bill faces endless obstacles. Since 1881, Lord Dalhousie has submitted it repeatedly. Each time it passes easily in the House of Lords, but collapses in the House of Commons, blocked by MPs with convenient excuses. The official objection, raising the age to 16, would allow malicious girls to blackmail respectable men. They imagine absurd scandals, gentlemen ruined simply for speaking too long with a maid. But you know better. In pubs, backstage at theatres, and inside private gentlemen's clubs, you've heard the whispers. Some MPs opposed the bill because they themselves are customers of the underground trade in young girls. You wrote furiously that these depraved sinners use their status to prey on the daughters of the poor. Are they defending legal fairness or protecting their own hunting grounds? You will never know, because you cannot pry open a Victorian gentleman's skull to see whether it holds noble principles or base desire. But ambiguity itself is your weapon. You don't need perfect evidence. You need only to raise a disturbing reasonable suspicion, and public outrage will ignite. Parliamentary debate has reached a dead end. The conventional path has failed. You must turn to something unconventional, explosive enough to blow the festering wound wide open. You will show Britain how monstrous reality becomes when the law looks away. And then, with the same detached professionalism that had undoubtedly accompanied countless other tragedies, Madame Murray confirmed the quality of the girl. In your later article, you even quoted her as murmuring a single chilling line. Poor little thing. With that sentence, the final piece of your plan fell into place. Eliza, the real Eliza, the girl who wanted nothing more than to earn a wage and help her family, had officially been transformed in your narrative into Lily, the symbol of London's corruption. And now that she had passed this cruel inspection, she was ready for the next act of your orchestrated drama. Rebecca led Eliza back through the streets of Soho, the air thick with coal dust and the shouts of vendors. Though the girl barely noticed, her mind was filled with fear and confusion. She clutched the sides of her borrowed dress, trying to steady her trembling hands. Every corner they turned took her further away from home, further away from the life she thought she understood. For Rebecca, each step echoed with ghosts of her past, the brothels she once entered unwillingly, the cold hands of men who treated her as an object, the nights she prayed to survive until sunrise. Returning to these streets felt like returning to the grave she had clawed her way out of. And yet here she was again, resurrected for a mission she had never wanted. You watched all of this unfold from afar, trusting your agents, trusting your plan, trusting the righteousness of your cause. In your mind, every lie, every manipulation, every psychological wound inflicted on this child was justified, because at the end of it all, the law would change. At the end of it all, you would have saved countless girls. But at this exact moment, there was only one girl, and she was terrified. Rebecca brought Eliza into the brothel again, where the dim lamplight cast wavering shadows on the peeling wallpaper. A woman with painted cheeks looked up, surprised to see a child being brought in. But Rebecca whispered the rehearsed explanation, and the woman turned away with a knowing sigh. Eliza had never felt smaller. She sensed danger, but did not understand its shape. What she knew was that she wanted her mother. She wanted her brothers. She wanted her narrow alley, her cramped room, the damp smell of home. But the world she was in now felt vast and cruel and made of whispers she couldn't decipher. Meanwhile, you awaited word. Your team had gathered enough information, enough testimony, enough hidden stories. But until this girl, this one real, undeniable case of a child purchased in London, your plan lacked the spark that would ignite the empire. You needed her story. You needed her suffering. You needed her body to be the battlefield upon which you would wage your war for reform. But war always has casualties. And your war had chosen its casualty long before she ever stepped out of that alley in Lisson Grove. Late that night, Rebecca sent word that the girl had been delivered, inspected, and prepared for the final phase of your investigation. You felt a surge of triumph, a certainty that history was turning beneath your pen. But history is rarely clean, and justice born from manipulation carries a stain that can never be fully washed away. You convinced yourself that the ends justified the means. You believed God himself sanctioned your strategy. But Eliza, pulled from her home under false promises, examined like merchandise, thrust into places no child should ever see, was not thinking about parliament or reform or righteousness. She was thinking only of escape. She lay awake that night in a strange bed, staring at a cracked ceiling, her heart pounding with the weight of a danger she couldn't name. And in another part of London, you were sharpening your sword of ink, preparing to strike at the darkness you despised, never pausing to wonder if some of that darkness had already seeped into you. He confirmed the quality of the girl to Rebecca, and according to your later report, this hardened old abortionist even sighed. Poor little thing. She's so small. She must be in such pain. After the examination, Mrs. Murray made an extra bit of profit. She sold Rebecca a small bottle of anaesthetic, a chemical widely used at the time to dull pain, but just as often whispered about in crime stories, a substance that might as well have been the ancestor of the modern date rape drug. That bottle would be used in the next step of your plan to render Eliza incapable of resisting in a brothel room. You watched all of this unfold as a self-proclaimed moral crusader, and yet here you were, letting a reformed ex-brothel procuress, a notorious underground midwife, and a terrified 13-year-old girl enact a cold, clinical commodification of a child's body in the name of justice. Madame Murray's role in all this is deeply unsettling. To the judge who would later sentence her, she was a thoroughly depraved villain, the most guilty of all the defendants. But from another angle, she might simply have been a hardened, practical businesswoman, fighting to survive at the bottom of society. For her, examining a girl's body was no different from delivering a baby, performing an abortion, or selling a bottle of chloroform. Each was just a transaction with a set price. Perhaps she had long since stopped thinking about the morality behind any of it, or perhaps the constant repetition had numbed her completely. This is the banality of evil, and it is in some ways more chilling than the image of a fanged monster hiding in the dark. It shows how, in a world where human bodies are reduced to merchandise, any violation can become routine, ordinary, almost boring. Now, holding the cold certificate of purity and that small bottle of anaesthetic, Rebecca took the trembling Eliza toward their final destination, 32 Poland Street. There the stage was set, and the carefully orchestrated atrocity was about to begin. Picture this. You are sitting in the bar on the ground floor of the brothel at 32 Poland Street, doing your best to play your role. You order a drink and let it sit untouched on the table. You are a devout Christian, a lifelong teetotaler, but right now you need that glass as a prop to make yourself look like a seasoned customer. Upstairs, in one of the rooms, Rebecca is dealing with Eliza. Her task is to use the bottle she bought from Mrs. Murray to drug the girl to make her docile and unable to resist. But Eliza's resistance is fiercer than expected. This 13-year-old, though small, has a powerful instinct to survive. She dodges, twists away, pushes the medicated handkerchief aside again and again. In the end, Rebecca gives up on the chloroform. Instead, she simply leaves Eliza alone in the room to wait for her first client. You take a deep breath, climb the creaking stairs, and push open the door. You expect to see an unconscious, half-drugged child, but instead you find Eliza sitting on the edge of the bed, back straight, eyes wide with terror, staring at you. When she sees you, a strange man, enter the room, she does not scream. She only repeats one desperate plea, over and over. Please let me go home. Please let me go home. In that moment, you perform the most crucial and most deceptive part of the entire plan. You do not comfort her. You do not explain. You do not stay even a second longer than necessary. You turn on your heel, stride out of the room, and slam the door behind you. For anyone listening outside, the madam, the servants, the other women, that sound tells the story all by itself. The client went in, stayed just long enough, and then left. Immediately afterward, your allies from the Salvation Army, Bramwell Booth and his men, rush in with military precision. They grab the terrified Eliza, hustle her down the back stairs, and spirit her away into the London night. That same night, Eliza is put on a ship bound for France, where a family connected to the Salvation Army will take her in and hide her from the storm that is about to break. The operation is fast, clean, efficient, but the real climax happens not in that room, not even on that ship, but in your writing. A few days later, in the Pall Mall Gazette, when you describe this scene, you write that the buyer entered the room and heard the girl's helpless cries. Then, instead of clearly describing what happened next, you slide into a haze of suggestive fragmented phrases, dotted with ellipses and ambiguities, before ending with a cold, flat sentence that implies conclusion without stating it. You never actually say that a rape took place, but you guide the reader's imagination step by careful step to the edge of that conclusion and leave them to fall the rest of the way on their own. This is the most controversial and blatant act of media manipulation in the entire affair. You have not lied. You never explicitly describe the act, but you knowingly exploit the enormous power of suggestion. You plant, with deliberate artistry, the story of a violated child in the minds of hundreds of thousands of readers. You use Eliza's genuine fear and your own meticulously staged performance to co-author a crime that never actually occurred. Through your words, you make your audience feel as though they have witnessed an atrocity with their own eyes. And then there is the question of France. Why send Eliza abroad? It is not only for her safety. Throughout your series, you hammer home the idea of an international trade in English girls sold into sexual slavery on the continent. By successfully sending Eliza out of the country without any difficulty, you create not just an example of danger, but a demonstration. Look how easy it is, you tell the public, to smuggle an English girl to France. From beginning to end, every step of this so-called rescue has been designed to gather and manufacture evidence for your upcoming earth-shaking exposé. Every road Eliza walks down is chosen by you. Every door that opens and closes around her is choreographed to serve your narrative. She's not just being saved, she's being exhibited. On the Monday, July 6th, 1885, the air in London feels hotter than usual. The day before, the front page of the Pall Mall Gazette carried an extraordinary warning. In a deliberately provocative tone, you tell your readers that anyone delicate, anyone who pretends to be easily shocked, anyone who prefers to live in a comfortable fantasy and turn a blind eye to the horrors suffered by the poor in London's hellish underworld should not read Monday's issue of the Gazette. This announcement hits the city like a depth charge dropped into a still lake, detonating curiosity everywhere. And so, on July 6th, the first part of your monumental series, The Maiden Tribute of Modern Babylon, spills across 6 whole pages. You choose a title steeped in classical tragedy. Modern Babylon is your metaphor for London, a city swollen with wealth and rotting with moral decay. The Maiden Tribute reaches back to the Greek myth of Athens, sending young boys and girls into the labyrinth to be devoured by the Minotaur. In your hands, London becomes the labyrinth, desire becomes the Minotaur, and the girls of the slums become the modern tribute. Your headlines are the pure essence of new journalism, each one like a thunderclap. The violation of virgins, the confession of a brothel keeper, how little girls are bought, bound, and ruined. In your prose, you build a vast, intricate underground network with almost novelistic detail. You describe soundproofed rooms where girls' screams are swallowed by padded walls. You quote brothel owners, pimps, and victims, each testimony a brick in the wall of your indictment. At the heart of it all lies one key chapter, the account of how a 13-year-old girl, whom you call Lily, is purchased in London. You write it in the first person, casting yourself as the investigator who walks into the darkness so his readers will not have to. And then London explodes. The public reaction is far beyond anything you imagined. Crowds of exhausted, poorly dressed people line up outside the Gazette's offices, waving pennies, fighting to buy a copy. The entire stock sells out. You are forced to buy paper from your rival, the Globe, and print again. A penny paper is suddenly fetching 20 times its price on the street. Some major distributors refuse to carry it, declaring the content obscene, so your staff and volunteers take bundles of papers into the streets and sell them directly, like leaflets in a revolution. It is said that in just a few days, official and pirated copies together reach well over 1.5 million readers. At first, other London newspapers seethe in resentful silence. Then they begin to attack you with ferocity, calling your series the most disgusting collection of filthy obscenity ever put into print. Members of Parliament stand up in the House and demand that you be prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act. Outraged fathers cancel their subscriptions, writing that they refuse to let such stories enter their homes and corrupt their wives and daughters. You have created a moral panic on a scale no one has seen before, But beneath the outrage, you have struck a nerve that was already there. The Victorian fear of urban rot, the fear that the working classes will infect the middle classes, the fear that the next generation's innocence is under siege. You give that fear a name, Minotaur. You give it a face, Lily. And then you amplify it with every weapon of modern mass media. While the storm you have summoned rages across London, a smaller, quieter ripple forms far away from Fleet Street, in a cramped little room in Lisson Grove. Elizabeth Armstrong, the mother you have portrayed to your readers as callous and complicit, cannot read. But a neighbour reads the story aloud to her. A 13-year-old girl, daughter of a chimney sweep, sold in London by her own mother to a strange woman. Elizabeth listens, and as the details drip into her ears, the age, the father's job, the slum, the woman who took the girl away, she realizes with a shock that the Lily in your story is her daughter, Eliza. Terror grips her. She had believed, however naively, that her child had gone to a respectable job as a maid. Now she discovers that her daughter has been turned into the centerpiece of the most notorious scandal in London, implied to be lost, ruined, perhaps worse. And so she does the most natural thing a mother can do. She goes to the police and reports her child missing. On August 9th, a brief article appears in another paper. A mother seeks her child, reporting that Mrs. Armstrong has complained to the authorities. With that simple act, the nature of your drama changes completely. You were meant to be the director of this grand morality play, the hero who exposes the darkness, the judge who prosecutes the guilty. But with the police now involved, you find yourself dragged out of the role of accuser and shoved into the role of accused. Behind this lies the most fatal blind spot in your plan, the classic arrogance of the middle-class reformer. You thought you had written every part, assigned every role, controlled every reaction. In your mind, the poor, ignorant mother would either be a willing accomplice, cowed into silence, or a grateful victim, quietly thanking you for rescuing her child. You never seriously entertained a third possibility, that she would refuse to play the role you gave her, that she would act as a person in her own right, as a mother with her own grief and judgment. She did not follow your script. She went to the police. That tiny act of resistance from the very bottom of the society begins to crack the grand narrative you built so carefully. And yet, in a cruel twist of irony, just as your personal fate starts its downward plunge, your original goal is achieved in spectacular fashion. The tidal wave of public opinion your articles have unleashed crashes into Parliament. Meetings spill into the streets. Rallies swell into hundreds of thousands of people. One Hyde Park demonstration alone draws 250,000 protesters demanding immediate reform. MPs who once mocked the Criminal Law Amendment Bill now rush to support it rather than face the fury of their constituents. On August 14th, 1885, after 4 years of delay, the bill races through Parliament and becomes law. The age of consent is raised from 13 to 16. Police powers to combat the sex trade are expanded. The press dubs it the Stead Act. It is a dark joke history plays on you. You have used methods bordering on criminality to bring a law of justice into existence. At the very moment you are about to be charged with abducting a girl, you are also being hailed as the saviour of countless girls. Success and disgrace, hero and suspect, rescuer and perpetrator. These contradictions knot themselves together around your name in the summer of 1885. And then, as inevitably as the turning of the seasons, an arrest warrant is issued. You, together with Rebecca Jarrett, Bramwell Booth, Madame Murray, and several others, are charged with kidnapping and related crimes. The Crusaders who set out to expose the sins of the justice system now find themselves standing in the dock, waiting to be judged by it. All of London turns its gaze to the courtroom, eager to watch the man who taught an empire to tremble at his headlines face a verdict he can no longer write for himself. Everyone was waiting to see the finale of this grand drama. It was October 1885, and the autumn air in London carried a faint chill as the world's attention focused on the Central Criminal Court, the famous Old Bailey, where the final act of the scandal was about to unfold. Imagine you are a courtroom sketch artist in the gallery, quietly observing, recording this historic moment with your pencil. The atmosphere is solemn and heavy. Judges and barristers in traditional white wigs and black robes give the Victorian courtroom its peculiar, intimidating grandeur. In the dock stands a strange assembly of people: a celebrated newspaper editor, a young Salvation Army leader, a reformed former procuress, and a notorious French midwife, all once united by a common cause, now bound together as co-defendants under the same law they tried to shake. The case turns on two central charges. First, kidnapping. Under the law of the time, taking a girl under 16 from the custody of her legal guardian without her father's consent constitutes abduction. And here the crucial question is whether the father ever agreed. Second, indecent assault. This applies to the forced virginity examination performed on Eliza by Mrs. Murray. The clash between prosecution and defence turns the whole trial into a kind of legal Rashomon, where every witness offers a fragment of truth, and those fragments assemble into several completely different stories. Eliza's father, Mr. Armstrong the chimney sweep, testifies clearly that he never met Rebecca Jarrett and never gave permission for anyone to take his daughter. This alone puts the defence at a serious disadvantage, because the kidnapping statute hinges on his consent. Eliza's mother, Elizabeth Armstrong, repeats what she has said before. She insists she was deceived, that she believed her daughter was going to a respectable household as a maid. Her tears and obvious distress win over much of the courtroom, fitting perfectly with the Victorian ideal of the poor but respectable mother. Then Rebecca takes the stand under immense pressure. She maintains that she used the coded language of the trade, strongly hinting at her true intentions, and that Elizabeth must have understood. The prosecution immediately attacks her credibility, raking over her past as a brothel worker and procurer, inviting the jury to see her as an incorrigible liar whose word is worthless against that of a married mother. Finally, the central figure of the whole story appears. 13-year-old Eliza Armstrong, the girl your newspaper renamed Lily. Months have passed since her removal. She has been living under the protection of the Salvation Army and their allies. Now she stands before the court in clean, simple clothes, looking like a frightened little angel. And in a thin but steady voice she tells the jury that she always believed she was going into service as a maid, that she was eager to work and help her family. Her words align perfectly with the prosecution's narrative and with the public's favourite image of her, a pure, innocent victim. In the end, the jury is not simply sorting pieces of evidence, they are choosing between personas. On one side stands Rebecca, the fallen woman, her class and history stacked against her. On the other stands Elizabeth, the poor but decent mother, whose helplessness and tears stir the protective instincts of Victorian gentlemen more easily than any clever legal argument. And in the middle is Eliza, the most important witness of all, yet how reliable can her memory be? For months she has lived among people who constantly repeat the same story of rescue and evil, who frame her life in terms of sin and salvation. A 13-year-old child, immersed in such powerful narratives and under such intense adult expectation, may speak sincerely, but is she recalling events as she truly experienced them, or repeating the version she has been taught to believe is right? We cannot know. What we can say is that once again Eliza has been pushed to centre stage without ever being allowed to own the script. First you turned her into Lily, the symbol of violated innocence for your readers. Now the court turns her into the perfect victim for the legal drama. She speaks, yet her voice may never have fully belonged to her. In early November 1885, after long days of testimony and argument, the jury at the Old Bailey returns with its verdicts, and when the judge's gavel falls, the sentences laid out are like a mirror reflecting how unevenly the scales of justice tip in Victorian England. From the back of the courtroom, you look at the faces in the dock and see how sharply their fates diverge. Bramwell Booth, the young Salvation Army leader with a respectable family background and strong social connections, is acquitted. His counsel successfully presents him as a devout philanthropist misled by others. You, William Thomas Stead, famous editor and pillar of the middle class, are found guilty of kidnapping and sentenced to 3 months imprisonment, but under relatively lenient conditions. You will be allowed books, writing materials, visitors, and you will emerge not disgraced but burnished with the aura of martyrdom. Rebecca Jarrett, the lower class woman with a stained past, is convicted and sentenced to 6 months in prison with hard labour. Mrs. Louisa Murray, the elderly French midwife branded by the judge as a professional abortionist and corrupter of virtue, receives the harshest outcome. 6 months imprisonment with hard labour as well. The contrast lays bare how fragile the ideal of equality before the law becomes in the face of class and gender. Men of your social rank, even when they cross the line, can be recast as misguided idealists whose motives were noble, their punishment softened and wrapped in respectability. Women like Rebecca and Mrs. Murray, poor and already stigmatized, are treated as inherently depraved and are sent into the most brutal corners of the penal system. They go to Millbank Prison, into a world of suffering where punishment is deliberately designed to break body and spirit. Their daily task is to unpick tough coconut fibres used for rope, a monotonous, exhausting job that shreds their fingers until they are raw and bleeding. When Mrs. Murray proves too old and frail to keep up, she is given endless knitting instead, a different kind of slow, grinding torment for a 74-year-old woman. This is how the system distributes pain. Upward, it offers explanation and leniency. Downward, it offers the lash of labour and early graves. In January 1886, barely 2 months after entering prison, Mrs. Murray dies in the infirmary from complications of kidney, lung, and heart disease. She becomes, in a bleak way, the most direct casualty of this campaign for justice. At the same time, the law you helped bring into existence acquires an unexpected and sinister appendage. During the frantic, last-minute debates over the Criminal Law Amendment Act in Parliament, an MP named Henri Labouchere seizes the opportunity to tack on an 11th clause. Hastily drafted and barely discussed, it declares that any gross indecency between men, whether committed in public or private, is a criminal offence. The wording is vague, the implications enormous. A movement intended to protect young girls thus also gives birth to a tool that, for nearly a century, will be used to persecute gay men. 10 years later, Oscar Wilde will be tried and imprisoned under the Labouchere Amendment. Decades after that, Alan Turing will be prosecuted and chemically castrated under the same logic. Moral panic may pass, but the laws it produces can linger like ghosts. When the noise of the trial fades and the headlines move on, Those who were caught in the storm drift toward very different futures. Your own 3 months in Holloway Prison are almost comfortable by comparison. You turn your cell into a second editorial office, receive a constant stream of admirers and allies, write essays and letters, and stay at the centre of public debate, even behind bars. When you are released, crowds gather to greet you as a hero. You stand before them not as a disgraced criminal, but as a champion of social purity and press freedom, your reputation in many ways higher than before. You leave the Pall Mall Gazette, launch new journals, advocate passionately for international arbitration and a United States of Europe, ideas that anticipate the League of Nations and the United Nations. In your later years, you become fascinated with spiritualism, convinced you can communicate with the dead, still searching for voices beyond the visible world. Finally, on the night of April 14th and 15, 1912, you die as dramatically as you lived, going down with the Titanic as a first-class passenger, your body swallowed by the Atlantic. Rebecca serves her 6 months in Millbank and emerges deeply scarred. Friends say she was desolate in prison, tormented by nightmares after her release, haunted by guilt and by the sense that she had been used and then discarded. Yet she keeps the promise she once made to God and to herself. She spends the rest of her life working quietly with the Salvation Army, helping other women escape the life she once knew too well. In 1928, she dies in one of their homes in Hackney and is buried in Abney Park Cemetery with the honours of a Salvation Army member. Her life, which began in abandonment and degradation, ends in a kind of hard-won acceptance, like a long and painful road of atonements, finally reaching a place of rest. As for Eliza, the girl at the centre of it all, her story slips back into the shadows. After the scandal, she is returned to her family, but her life can never again be entirely ordinary. She will always be, in the eyes of history, the £5 girl. At 21, she marries a man named Henry West and moves north to Newcastle. She has 6 children and lives, outwardly at least, the life of an ordinary working-class wife and mother. She dies in County Durham in 1938 at the age of 66. It is said she once wrote to you, telling you simply that she had married a good man and had a happy family. Whether she ever told her husband or children about the time she was turned, without her consent, into a symbol for an entire nation's panic, we do not know. On the surface, the story seems finished. The law has changed. The sentences have been handed down. The main actors have exited the stage. But history has its own way of leaving seeds that bloom years later in unexpected forms. One such seed takes root in the mind of an Irish playwright living in London at the time, George Bernard Shaw. Shaw watches the frenzy you unleash with a sharp, sceptical eye. Like you, he despises the hypocrisy and rigid class hierarchy of Victorian Britain, but he reads the scandal from a very different angle. To you, Eliza Armstrong is the innocent girl you rescue and elevate by removing her from the slums and sending her abroad. To Shaw, your intervention is another kind of violence. The educated, upper-class reformer imposing his own vision on a poor girl's life for her own good, stripping away her language, her identity, and her agency in the process. Shaw is fascinated by this dynamic, the way class, speech, and power intertwine when one man decides to remake a woman into his own idea of what she should be. Almost 30 years later, in 1913, he writes a play that transforms the scandal into a very different kind of story. He sets aside sex trafficking and instead frames the experiment around language and manners, yet the core remains recognizable. The arrogant phonetics professor Henry Higgins bets he can take a rough-spoken flower girl from the streets and, through training, pass her off as a duchess in high society. He gives the girl a name, Eliza. Eliza Doolittle, the heroine of Pygmalion, is a fictional echo of Eliza Armstrong, the girl you bought for £5 in 1885. Through her, Shaw asks the question your campaign never really faced. When the flower girl's accent, clothes, and behaviour have all been transformed, who is she now? And where does she belong? Is she still herself? Can she truly return to her old world? Will the new world ever fully accept her? In the end, Higgins's experiment succeeds technically, but he is left facing a woman who is no longer an object, but a person with her own will, her own pain, her own demands. She cannot go back to selling flowers, yet she does not quite fit among the ladies either. She's been remade, but not reconciled. This, perhaps, is the most accurate artistic reflection on what happened in London in 1885. You helped transform Eliza Armstrong from a poor girl in a slum into a symbol that changed the law and inspired art. But in doing so, what did you take from her? Was her life saved, or was it violently redirected to serve narratives she never chose? Between justice and harm, between rescue and exploitation, the line in her story remains blurred, and the only certainty is that the loudest voices that claimed to speak for her were never truly hers.